Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Perspectives on Sustainable Development, episode 6. I am Chris Whitehead, your host, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that's become close to my heart over the last couple of years, and that's actually renewable energy development. And in no particular order, the first gentleman I'm going to be bringing on, actually Doug Houseman, principal with 1898 and Company. Doug and I first started chatting a couple of years ago when I was doing a cumulative impacts project in southern New Jersey. And I was very, very excited about the paper I put forward and a model I was putting together and the potential it might have. But Doug was quick to say, hey, wait a minute, you might want to be thinking about, and he gave me a list of like a dozen things. At first, I was like, wait a minute, who is this guy? But then I actually dug into this stuff a little bit and he ended up being right more than he was wrong. And again, it helped my work. So if you could come on camera now, please. Afternoon. How are you, Doug?
I'm doing well, Chris. And how are you doing?
I'm excited to chat.
Good. So am I.
Good, good. And then also next we have Professor Mark Jacobson from Stanford University, and also the author of a book we're going to be chatting about a little bit. No Miracles Needed. There's a plan to build out renewable technologies with what we actually have currently in place, more or less. Paraphrasing, obviously, but welcome, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm excited for this. I stink at introduction, so I wanted to also give you guys a chance to expand a little bit and potentially talk about how and why you chose to be doing the topical work that you are actually right now. And I don't mind whoever wants to go first, Doug or Mark.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, well, I've been a professor at Stanford University since 1994, so over 30 years now. But I really got interested in trying to understand and solve large-scale air pollution and climate problems through clean renewable energy when I was 13 years old and traveling to San Diego and Los Angeles and seeing all the air pollution. I thought, why should people live like this? And so I decided early on that this is what I want to do when I grow up, is to try to solve these problems and understand them better too, as well. And so here we are many years later, and that's what I'm doing.
Very nice. I like that. I like the thought that is something you kind of hooked in by very, very early on and kind of develop that thought. So again, thanks again and welcome. Doug, you next?
Thank you. I started on my dad's line truck. He's a second generation utility lineman. When I was 9, I got my IBW card when I was 15. Joined the Navy and ended up doing electrical sorts of things. Got sent to college, ended up at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, playing with the first lithium ion batteries and some of the early solar cells. Up in the Palo Alto area, I built a small community with some friends on the West Coast, soldering $15 per watt solar cells together in order to bring power to the area that we were looking at.
Both very, very interesting backgrounds. Um, I guess because we have a lot to cover, I'm just going to jump right in. I alluded to this very quickly in the introduction, but in a lot of grounds, we've come a long way over the last few years in renewables development, and it's encouraging to me in a lot of fronts. But can you just both of you speak a little bit as to where we currently are as far as base load in this country versus what various renewables are currently handling and what they're capable of handling over the next few years?
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, well, it varies a lot state by state in terms of the penetration of renewables on the grid. And well, first I'll point out that, there's four major energy sectors. There's electricity, transportation, buildings, and industry. And most people focus on the electricity sector. And so with regard to the overall penetration of renewables in the electricity sector, which is about 20% of all the end use energy is in electricity, but about a quarter of that's now renewables. But state by state, there's actually, you'd be surprised to know that South Dakota actually last year in 2024 produced 118% of all the electricity it consumed. So 118% of its demand was supplied by just wind, 80% wind, water, hydro, about 35% hydro, and about 3% solar. So 118% was just wind, water, solar, and then they also had another 10, 12% gas and another 10, 12% coal, or 15% go the other way around. So it's a total of 137%, and they exported all the difference. But so there's like one state over 100% renewables. Wyoming and Iowa are both at about 80%. Washington State's about 73% or so. They're actually 11 states over between 50 and 118% of their demand is met by renewables in 2024. And then California was around 47%. So there is a lot there at this top heavy. A lot of states are really high into renewables, but there are some states that are really low. The average is around 25% right now. The other sectors, not so great. Transportation, we now have a lot of battery electric vehicles, but not nearly as many. We only are on the order of a few percent still. And in buildings and industry, we're still a long ways to go to transition to renewables.
So, as Mark said, we're at about 25% across the United States, but we don't have any state yet that can point to, a month where they successfully provided renewable energy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we've got a long way to go, and we rely on fossil to fill in those gaps. Some people are talking about doing that with batteries, but right now the cost of batteries is unaffordable to fill in all of those gaps in the appropriate way, because the gaps are not even through the year. And so we need, in most states, between 18 and 20 hours of load available in storage in order to be able to do it by putting renewables away during the time that the renewables are not operating. So we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of good ideas, a lot of good technology, but we've got to make it something that everybody wants to be part of, because there's an awful lot of work to get enough renewables in place to power this country 24 hours a day, every day.
It's correct. We have a long way to go. We're not even close to getting there 24 hours a day, every day. But there is some progress on both in batteries and penetration. I'll just point to California this year so far in 2025. The last 55 days, we've been 100% renewable on the grid for part of the day, up to like 10 hours a day. But for an average of the entire year so far, it's been over 4 hours a day of 100% renewables. And batteries have grown to now they're almost 10 gigawatts of batteries on the grid. And just to give you perspective, the average demand in California in 2024 was 24 gigawatts. So now this is the main grid in California, the CAISO grid, which is about 82% of all the demand is met by that. And so 10 gigawatts, and these are 4-hour batteries. So they can meet close to, in a 24-hour period, they can meet up to close to 10% of the demand over a 24-hour period. So when we have extra electricity during the day, we have there's solar in California, you have solar plus wind plus geothermal plus hydro. So you have a good suite of renewables. And during the day is when you're getting over 100% renewables, pretty much, well, every day for the last 55 days straight. And in total, this year, 75% of all the days we've been over 100% renewables on the grid for part of the day, for an average of 4 hours a day. And the average supply of these renewables over the entire year so far is about 53% of the demand. But so we are getting a few hours of a day of over 100% renewables. The excess is going to charging batteries and then exported to out of state. And so there is some progress. Texas also has getting a lot of batteries as well. But and to fill in the nights, and just to put in perspective, there's actually in the queue in California, there's about 35 gigawatts of solar and 34 gigawatts of batteries. So if we just empty the queues, which requires a lot of work in terms of getting permissions from the transmission organizations, we would actually be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in California, 100% renewables with the additional solar and batteries alone on the grid because the solar will produce excess during the day. The batteries will then take that excess and then distribute it during the night. And there's sufficient batteries and solar just in the queue in California to go 100% renewables 24/7. Not to say that will happen just because of a lot of other issues, but there is potential with because with offshore wind, with enhanced geothermal, which is now a thing, and it's being developed in Utah, and there's going to be some is going to be transmitted to California by 2028. With more also distributed PV. The other thing is there's a lot of growth of behind the meter photovoltaics on rooftops. And this is why there's hardly any increase of demand in California, despite all the electric cars and AI and Bitcoin mining and data centers. There's only 1% growth of demand compared to last year. And compared to 2 years ago, there's actually 3% less demand in California on the grid because of all the growth of rooftop solar and batteries off behind the meter. So combining all these things together, it's actually looking really good. But as Doug said, it's like there's still a long way to go, and we're not even close on a national level.
Yeah, now to my follow-up that I was saving. Actually, Mark, all three of us are very active on LinkedIn, and I've noticed over the last year you highlight curves from California quite often. Speaking towards the type of example you just highlighted there a bit, I wonder if there's anything behind putting so much focus on the California example.
Sorry, if there's anything behind.
No, just is there a reason for focusing on that one as much as you are? Something to
Oh, I see.
highlight that you want to be sure people are actually seeing.
Well, I think partly I live in California, so it's of interest to me too. But I mean, it's just there's just the growth rate is really interesting. Or just these days when I started looking at the data and I started noticing these trends of 100% renewables for part of the day, that just became intriguing to me to see because people were saying this could never happen, and then it started happening on a small scale, at least on a for part of the day. And then this has been increasing, improving. I started tracking it like a year and a half ago, and I just started tracking it every day ever since. And it's just intriguing year on year how things are changing. And actually, I've done it like 2 years ago as well. But I look at other states as well. So I have tracked other states, but just not as in much detail. One of the interesting statistics I found from looking at all the states is that the 11 states that do produce 50 to 118% of the electricity they consume from renewables, 10 of those 11 states have electricity prices that are 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour or greater lower than the national average. So, in fact, the states that have more renewables have less expensive electricity, except for Maine was the only exception. California, which is ranked number 12, is also a high price state. But the states that have the most renewables as a fraction of their demand are actually all low cost electricity states. California's high electricity prices really have nothing to do with the renewables. They have to do with the wildfires that have been triggered by transmission line sparks, the San Bruno's and Aliso Canyon gas disasters, which are passed on to customer costs. The need to enforce or to underground or strengthen underground gas lines due to the San Bruno disaster in particular, the need for transmission upgrades due to all the wildfires and undergrounding transmission lines, the keeping Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant open. Those are the reasons we have high electricity prices in California. When we look at the spot price of electricity in California, it's actually lower now or last year when I looked at the data, it was like 50% lower than the year before with all the batteries and solar on the grid because it's just much easier to match demand. We haven't had a blackout in California on the main grid since 2020, August of 2020, so almost 5 years. And it's partly because of all these additional batteries that are backing up. It just makes it easier to match demand.
Okay, very
Oh, no,
interesting.
I'll make one last point. In
Yeah, please.
California, there's 45% less gas use on the grid than 2 years ago, and 25% less than last year as well.
That's definitely some good information. It speaks towards trends. I want to give you a chance to respond also, Doug, to what everything Mark was just going through. Then also, Mark was speaking to effectively what stranded capacity as well, and not being able to get all the projects online currently without updating our grid. And I wonder, Doug, if you could speak to, after responding to Mark, what type of a heavy lift we're trying here and how much is actually involved.
Well, I mostly agree with what Mark said, though. If you were to run California right now purely on the storage on a summer day, all of the storage that's in California would probably run out in 3 to 4 hours. That's way better than 3 years ago where it was 2 minutes.
Mhm.
But we got a long way to go to be able to deal with no wind or a day with a Pineapple Express where wind doesn't work and solar is obscured by the kinds of rains that come in during that time. And California really doesn't have a backup to a lot of their renewable energy because they've so constrained transmission over the years. Past 19 took 21 years to permit. Past 23 never got permitted, but we worked on it for 23 years. And right now, the line that we've been trying to put in from British Columbia into California is 29 years old, and we still don't have permits. So those constraints are real world issues, many of them driven by individual lawsuits, county lawsuits, permitting requirements, and other things of that sort. And we've gone back to the drawing board on the line from British Columbia on a path and getting new right-of-way approvals for more than a decade, starting over 10 times. So building transmission is not easy. The Biden administration said they would not use eminent domain to make transmission paths. And I doubt this administration will either. Right now, for the kinds of lines that we're talking about out of British Columbia down to LA, would be about $30 million a mile plus the rights of way and the permitting. So we're looking at something in the neighborhood of $300 to $400 billion, about the same price as the current California project to put in high-speed rail.
I'm happy you touched on the point as to how long these projects often take, but I'll get back to that in a little bit. But I also wanted to touch on just fundamentally how long does it take to produce the components, the transformers, the various parts and pieces that you need to put lines up, and is there currently a backlog with any of that?
Currently, there's about a 7.5 year backlog
Wow.
around the world for high voltage transformers of the size that you would need for an ultra high voltage transmission line. Switchgear is currently running in the 7 year time frame. Siemens, ABB, Hitachi, and two other companies have committed in the last 6 months $1 billion to expanding facilities, but much of that investment will be thrown away with the new regulations from the U.S. Department of Energy, because we have to go to amorphous core transformers. And that means completely retraining the workforce, all new machines. We need to spin up a steel mill in the United States to make the material. And so we're looking right now at a 7 to 10 year gap in new transmissions, new transformers at the volume we need in order to be able to do all the transmission work that people want to do. It even goes all the way down to current transformers, which are simple little pieces of wire. They have an accuracy that's required of them. We currently only have one plant in North America, and it happens to be in Canada, that makes revenue grade CTs. So we're looking at a 5 to 7 year wait to get CTs for projects, and those things fit in a shoebox by the dozen.
Huh.
So it's not just big iron, it's also smaller pieces of equipment because of the technical accuracy that we just can't get today.
Interesting. So that kind of begs the question, and I'll open this one up to either one of you. The challenge is huge for trying to convert over to cleaner energies. The challenge is huge for trying to update the grid. Are there any actions we can take to try to speed things up and get more efficient with how we do all these processes?
If we were to take Manchin's permitting bill and run that through Congress and get it signed, it would put time clocks on all the federal permits. It wouldn't make them go away, but it would say, if you don't decide by X date, then the permit is granted. And I think that's one of the best things that we could do right now, because we got the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, where for pump storage, not a dam on a river, but a basin away from a river, we've got permits that have been waiting for approval for more than 13 years. We've got a project in an iron mine that we're waiting on the Coast Guard permit for. Because for any pump storage basin, whether it's in an underground or otherwise, we got to get a Coast Guard permit.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, it's true that the transmission constraints, they're limiting, time is a limiting factor. And this is why I think, when we're looking at a large scale, how to transition a country or state, we definitely have to build up the renewables, but there's a trade-off between building up huge amounts of storage and huge amounts of transmission. You can imagine in the limit, if we powered the whole US, if we had enough transmission to interconnect it everywhere in the US, we wouldn't need any storage really. We would just be able to wield electricity back and forth. The other extreme is, well, if we have no transmission, we would just need lots of local generation and local storage. So we need infinite amount of storage or huge amounts of storage and local generation, no transmission. So if transmission is a constraint, this is why batteries and other types of storage are growing really fast, is because they are kind of lower hanging fruit in terms, while we're waiting for more transmission, batteries can help go a long way towards helping meet demand continuously. So that's why we see huge growths of batteries in certain states and countries. And we're going to see more because the price has dropped. I mean, it's now the price of batteries down. Well, in China, it's like $60 a kilowatt hour. And that's really the price where there's really no limit to, if you get to, 60 there's no limit to how much renewables you can put on in storage and solve the entire world's energy problems with just renewables at that price of batteries. But that's not the whole system price. I mean, the whole system price is maybe $120 a kilowatt hour. But if you can get the whole system price down to 60, then there's no limit to, we can really solve the problem with minimal transmission additions. But we do want a mix of transmission, batteries, generation, but not only that, reducing demand, behind the meter, photovoltaics and storage. When people put solar on their roof, they're using that electricity directly. Then you don't need transmission. That's how you reduce transmission requirements, is by putting a lot of rooftop solar on everybody's roof, businesses, industrial buildings, schools, everywhere. I mean, we can supply 25% or more of the world's energy just with rooftop PV, and we don't need any transmission for that, or hardly any. So that would be.
And I'll disagree with most of that.
Okay.
In the first place, the current cost, and I'm looking at invoices from real projects right now for installed lithium-ion batteries, is between $500 and $520 a kilowatt hour. These are real projects, real invoices in Texas, in California, and other locations of utility scale. So it's not $120 or $160. It's north of $500. It's down from $1,200 a few years ago, but it's up by $30 a kilowatt hour over the last 12 months, mostly in decreased labor costs. As far as transmission or solar or storage, No, because in northern Minnesota, you make photovoltaic 3 hours a day in December. That means those houses with rooftop solar and no storage, and that's what they have, would be dark 21 hours a day.
Yeah.
There's a mismatch between load and supply. And so we'd have to store it at the site, trickle it into the city, put it into storage in the city. So two sets of storage. And then you would be able to do it with a lot less transmission.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll counter that. Yeah, in the United States, battery prices are higher, but this is not what the prices are in the world. I was referring to China. That's what the actual price is of batteries is for the sell price of $60 a kilowatt hour. And the total system cost when you do that out is like 120. So that's what the United States has higher prices for a variety of reasons, but and that's also regional. There's some places where you're looking at certain bids, but there are other bids where they're between 100 and $200 a kilowatt hour. Now, in terms of the PV and I'm certain. Well, if you look at PV, the location where you have the most annual average PV, if you tilt and track panels, it'd be surprising is Antarctica, the annual average. If you put a PV cell in Antarctica and you track the sun, you get more annual average kilowatt hours of solar electricity than anywhere else in the world. So
because mostly the air is too cold for clouds.
no, well, it's higher because it's elevated, but it's also because, so you're elevated above the clouds because you're in the mountains in Antarctica. But my point is you're right that there's a seasonal shift and variation. So, but what they do, like in Canada and in Northern Europe, is you take that solar. There are a lot of places that take solar during the summer because in Minnesota or anywhere further north, you have very long summer days. So you take solar, not photovoltaics, but solar thermal, and you heat up water. You transfer that water underground. You store that heat either underground or in big water pits or in aquifers. So you have seasonal heat storage. In Drake Landing, Canada, which is an hour south of Calgary, they do this in multiple locations in Denmark and Sweden and northern other places in Northern Europe. They have seasonal heat storage. So you can take that solar heat, store it for 6 months, round trip efficiency about 55, 60%. It costs less than $1 a kilowatt hour of heat storage. And you can use that for the heating for the winter. So you don't need to use the solar electricity in the winter where you don't have it, as you pointed out. But you can store summer heat during winter. But you also have when you have a lot of wind in the northern climate. So Minnesota, other places north, you have a lot of wind. So that's why you don't just do solar. You do combine it with wind. You have a lot of hydro in the north. Wind, water, solar. It's a combination. Hydro is a big storage facility, and then with battery. And then also energy efficiency going to electrifying. I mean, one reason California can match its demand so easily versus Texas is because the average person in California uses only two and a half times less electricity per person than in Texas. The per capita electricity use in Texas is 2.5 times that of California. And that's because of energy efficiency improvements, more efficient refrigerators, appliances, machines, buildings, building codes have been put up since the 70s. And that's why we use a lot less electricity in California per person. And that's if we implemented efficiency standards throughout the US and worldwide, there would be a lot less demand for energy. So combination of less demand, a lot of rooftop solar. I'm not saying rooftop solar solves the problem, it just helps. And especially obviously more sunny places, it helps more, reduces on average transmission. But yeah, it's a challenge. I'm not saying we have the solution everywhere. It's a challenge everywhere, but I think there are different solutions for different locations, and combining the combination of batteries, transmission, solar, wind, geothermal, hydro. And enhanced geothermal is going to help a lot because that's base load, and you can now put enhanced geothermal anywhere because you just have to dig deep enough, and it's becoming cheaper and cheaper to do that. So there are potential solutions these days where we didn't have them before. Not saying it's done or even close to done, but I think we put our mind to it, we can solve these problems.
And on that point, Mark, I'm happy you brought up the fact that each geography would have different potential answers a type of renewable energy in a cold weather climate over here isn't going to potentially be good over here. And again, going back to your book, I think it's good. It's good. It's a good read for a lot of reasons, but it digs into the technologies that are out there, what the current capabilities are, and as we've been talking about to this point, how far we've frankly come over the last few years. But that's also what I want to transition to next. There has been a lot of progress over the last few years, and we've identified a lot of challenges in front of us. But then obviously, anyone looking at the news right now, and there's a lot of discontinuity and turbulence, for lack of a better word. How much is possible as far as renewables growth over, say, the next 4 to 5 years in our country? And if you want to identify anything that might also be limiting that progress.
Um, well, I think the biggest limitation now is what we call the all of the above policy. Let's just try everything and hope something works, which goes back to the Obama administration, actually. And so there are a lot of technologies being proposed and funded through subsidies, through even in the Inflation Reduction Act, and but around the world in many countries that I think are just not useful at all for helping solve the problems. I mean, they might provide energy or continue existing energy, but they don't solve climate, air pollution, or energy security problems. And for those of us who want to solve those problems, that's the reason we're even like really focusing on renewable energy is because to try to solve one or all of these problems.
Interesting. Doug?
Let's start with all of the equipment that I just talked about, because if you are ordering a brand new transformer that's a high voltage transformer right now, you're going to get it in 2032 or 2033. So I don't care what you're trying to install. If you haven't already ordered and paid for your high voltage transformer, you're not installing a major anything. I don't care whether it's nuclear, solar, wind, advanced geothermal, or whatever. I will disagree that nuclear is a wrong answer. If you work the total cost of ownership over a nuclear power plant life, you're going to spend 3 times as much money putting in, maintaining, replacing, repowering a solar and battery site that you will a nuclear power plant, even if we repeat the stupidly ridiculous price that we paid for Vogtai. So, and I've proven it in a number of cities, working the numbers with people there so that we've localized it. You can't count on the levelized cost of energy because it's not local. And many of the assumptions don't work in much of the United States. Now, Mark, I love the idea of advanced geothermal, but in Michigan, I would have to drill 37,000 feet into the ground in order to get to the temperature to be able to run a steam turbine.
Well, with regard to nuclear, I mean, even if it's a perfect technology in terms of what it does or cost, which I'll dispute, but I'll just say that, let's say that it is. The problem is it can't even be installed in less than 17 to 23 years in North America or Europe. So it's even worse than transmission. I mean, the 2 Vogtle reactors, which are the first reactors in the United States in 30 years, each one took 17 and 18 years respectively from planning to operation. And it cost, as you mentioned, $35 billion, which is close to $16 a watt, which is 20 times the capital cost of new solar.
And it's
So
still cheaper than solar over 80 years.
no, it's not cheaper.
Yes, it is.
Well, it doesn't matter because you can't build it. So like if you want to plan some new reactor today, 2025, it won't be ready till 2042. So we need to solve 80% of the climate problem by 2030 and 100% by 2035. So new nuclear is completely useless at doing anything. I mean, and in Europe, it's even worse. I mean, the Finnish plant took 23 years. Flamanville, France took 20 years. Hinkley, UK it's anticipated 2031. That'll be 23 years. Then there's no reactor in the world ever built that took less than 10 years. And today it's 12 years is the minimum in China. in China last year in 2024, they built 370 gigawatts of solar and wind. They finished 3.9 gigawatts of nuclear. So they're almost 100 times the more solar and wind than nuclear. And that's the fastest country that's building any nuclear. And there's less nuclear output last year than in 2005. So it's not being built. It's anything being built is just replacing existing nuclear. So even the fact that we would focus on that, it's not helpful. It just doesn't, you can't build it no matter how much you want it. And it's
We'll
not
agree to
carbon free.
disagree on that one.
And it's not carbon free. It's 9 to 37 times the carbon emissions as wind. So why would you want to build it if it's not even doing what people claim it's doing too? So you can't build it. It's not carbon free. It has all these risks, weapons proliferation risk, meltdown risk. 1.5% of reactors built worldwide have melted down to some degree. Any other technology that had that high risk, we wouldn't build it. So it's just not useful for the solution to the problem. It's a technology that has helped in the past at a high cost, but it's not in existing nuclear. If it doesn't need subsidy, sure, keep it open. But new nuclear, including small modular nuclear reactors, same thing. Why would we build small reactors? There's less energy per unit materials needed than large reactors. We went to large reactors because of economies of scale. These small ones, not going to be cheaper. They're going to take just as long. They have the same risk, even more risk of weapons proliferation and meltdown risk. It's a, I mean, I think we need to focus. We really want to solve these problems in a short time. We have to focus on technologies we can implement quickly and without a problem. I agree totally about the transmission constraints. That's a real issue, and that's going to be a limitation. So we're 100% agreement on that. But I think from my point of view, I'm trying to solve these problems rapidly. We got to focus on things we can implement quickly.
And I'm happy you brought up a point, Mark, about trying to cut 80% of warming by 2030. Um, it, I guess just your opinion on something. Would you agree? Is that is that a date that should be looked at as a year X, like we have to buy this, or is it more of we're trying to cut all warming we can as fast as we can, as sustainably as we can, or is it a little bit of both?
Well, it's really, I mean, that date, 80% by 2030, 100% by 2035, or as soon as possible after, is really was originally to avoid 1.5 degrees global warming. And we're already on the cusp of that, depending on which data set you look at. So we may blow past that. It's really, at this point, we have to just stop as fast as possible. But there are 7.5 million people die of air pollution every year. And so every year we delay, we're also, and 90% of those are energy related pollution deaths. And so every year we delay, millions more people are dying. So yeah, from an air pollution point of view, we need to stop everything tomorrow. This is why battery electric vehicles are useful. Solar replacing coal or gas is useful. Anything we're getting on the grid, the existing grid or behind the meter, right away is helpful for addressing air pollution and also climate. So it is a question of as fast as possible, but just that's really to put the 2030 date is to put in perspective the original timeline for 1.5 degrees overshoot.
It's tough though too, because again, going back to what I alluded to before, there's been a lot of turbulence and discontinuity at the federal level as it pertains to offshore wind, renewables, and I've had people ask me, frankly, is this possible? Is this going to happen? Is our current president going to allow this to happen? And there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. You want to both speak to a little bit of that, of the propensity now for people to jump towards a story and a clickbait article without necessarily getting all the facts first.
Let's talk about Spain for a minute. We won't talk about the other 8 blackouts that have happened in good weather since the first of the year. We'll just focus on Spain.
Sounds
So the Red Electra, who is the transmission operator, the equivalent of the California ISO in Spain, came out with a press conference the day after the blackout, about 4 hours after they solved getting most people back online. And they spent 44 minutes very carefully, and it's archived on YouTube if you want to listen to it, saying, we don't know this, we don't know this, we don't know this, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, we don't know this, we don't know this, and we don't know this. And the reporters kept asking, well, what if it was this? What if it was this? What if it was this? And Red Electric kept saying, we don't have the data. It will take time to gather the data. And for the 2003 blackout in the United States, it took 7 months to get the data together and create a draft report. At that point, they only had 150 generation sources that they weren't archiving the data for. Today in Spain, there are over 3,000 sources that are 1 megawatt or larger that don't send that data to the grid operator. All they send is voltage and current and kilowatt hours. And so all of the control systems and the other data that gets archived at the generation site by privacy laws in Spain are not sent to the control center. That's likely going to change after this. But it will probably take Red Electra 2 to 3 months to gather all of that data, or at least as much of it that was actually archived, and be able to figure out, where did it start? Was it an over voltage, over current situation from too much solar? Was it an under voltage, under frequency issue from too much load? We don't know even that. So we can't say whether inertia is useful or not useful in the grid, because we don't know what started things. We don't know which generation facilities tripped. We know that something probably between 1 and 2 gigawatts tripped first. There are no plants that big, so it means that at least 2 or 3 plants tripped together. Then we had 3 seconds. And then we had another something between 9 and 15 gigawatts trip. And at that point, the interconnectors from both Morocco and France saw a reverse. They were exporting from Spain every bit of solar they could. And within about 3 seconds, the interconnector in France saw 2.5 gigawatts out to 2.5 gigawatts in, and falling frequency. And so the protection system tripped. Why that happened, we don't know. And why everybody wants an instant answer to things is beyond me. Reuters has now come online and said, oh, we're going to have to spend trillions of euros to fix the European grid. Reuters, Bloomberg, Forbes, the Washington Post, all of the news networks that deal with business, all have created their own theories and thrown them around with talking heads like, this is the answer. We don't know what the answer was. And even if we knew what, we don't know why.
I thought it's strange too, frankly, but not terribly surprising. Almost everything I read was very fast to blame solar, to blame the a mix of renewables that Spain has for what happened. But I think you're right, Doug, to point out that it's just too fast to make any educated statements on it.
Yeah. Right. I think one thing that's for sure is that, well, the blackout occurred at 12:30 p.m. when you have peak solar. So, and you have solar is distributed. I mean, even with the utility plants, you've got a lot of individual farms. So all the utility farms didn't just suddenly stop producing solar electricity at 12:30 p.m. on a sunny day. So that's one thing I think we do know, that it's not a question of generation suddenly stopped. I mean, maybe the transmission line was messed up and had a problem, but It wasn't the generation, which a lot of people are saying, oh, solar didn't work or something like that. But
Well, we actually have two reports from Texas on two incidents in Odessa where more than 100 megawatts in different solar farms, the inverters all stopped at the same time. And those reports are available from NERC, along with now the FERC 901 decision on IBRs in order to prevent that from happening again.
yeah, but that's 100 megawatts, which is,
More than 100 megawatts.
yeah, which is not very much on the Texas grid, which is like 40 gigawatts. But look at Cuba, though. Cuba had blackouts, multiple blackouts at the beginning of this year and during this year. And the reason is because they rely on their electricity is produced from oil. And it really exemplifies the energy security problems with fossil fuels. It's the reliance Cuba relies on their oil from three countries like Venezuela, Mexico, and Russia, which had all decreased their supplies of oil to Cuba. And then simultaneously, well, in December, there was, or I forget exactly the date, but there was a hurricane, and I think it was Maria or something. Hurricane Maria had caused a lot of ships that were delivering oil to be stranded and not deliver the ships to Cuba. And so then there was an increase of demand, and then they didn't have enough supply, and there was a blackout. And this happened multiple times. But this is one reason why especially island countries, they really should be relying on their own energy, not on foreign fuel in that case, but also not on centralized plants. If you're relying on one centralized plant and you're relying on foreign fuel for that to provide that energy, that's putting your country at risk, or your island state, or like could be a state too. So that's why like having distributed renewables can be helpful. Obviously, there are issues associated with them. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's just you do have the cases where you have blackouts that are related to fossil fuels and the energy insecurity problems associated with them.
Well, you both have given me a lot to think about, but I know we're starting to run up on time a little bit as well. So just out of my own curiosity, I don't know if you guys wanted to speak a little bit about what you're currently working on, and if you could ideally focus your time on any of the aspects have just been talking about, where would you think your time would best actually be spent to affect some positive change here?
Well, I've been working on developing energy plans for countries and states and cities to transition to 100% renewables and storage, and using demand response, energy efficiency, electrification of everything. So looking at all the energy sectors and transitioning all the energy sectors to renewables across latest plans were for 150 countries. And these plans indicate from a theoretical point of view, if we can transition, we can save a lot of money. We reduce energy requirements because electrification of transportation, of buildings, of industry reduces energy use significantly due to the efficiency of electric heat pumps versus combustion heaters, electric vehicles versus combustion vehicles, even electrified industry versus burning things for heat. And you reduce energy use, and that results in a lot less cost of energy. When you look at the annual cost of energy, reduce air pollution, reduce climate damage, you even use less land. In the United States, this is a really interesting statistic. 1.24% of all US land is used to grow corn for ethanol for transportation, and that supplies only 4% of US transportation energy, 1.24% of all US land. Another 1.3% of US land is occupied by the fossil fuel industry. So 2.54% of US land is for energy at a minimum. Whereas if you transition the whole US, based on our calculations, to 100% renewables across all energy sectors, we'd occupy about 1% of US land with wind, mostly onshore wind, and then utility PV and CSP because the rooftop PV doesn't take up new land and offshore doesn't take up new land. So that we'd actually reduce land use significantly, and the cost would be about annual cost of energy about 60% lower mostly because of your reducing energy requirements by 54% due to the efficiency of electricity. And then there's a 10% or 15% cost per unit energy reduction. social costs would go down over 90% because of the health and climate cost benefits. So, I mean, these are theoretical calculations, but they do indicate, and I could say, like, even, I mean, I built a house in 2017, all electric, no gas, solar, batteries, electric cars. I haven't paid an electricity bill, a gas bill, or gasoline bill in 8 years. And I paid it off the system in 5 years. I mean, there are tax credits and benefits, but it would be paid out in 9 years without any tax benefits. Solar's warranted for 25 years. Every house that should have solar and batteries, and every house should be all electric, no gas. This is one way to really help solve these problems on a large scale by new construction should be electric, solar as much as possible. But anyway, that's mostly what I've been working on, but other stuff as well.
Great. Interesting. Doug?
I'm going to focus on the question you asked, Chris, which is what am I going to do to try and help make things better in the transition? I've been campaigning hard to get the permitting issues solved. I've been working hard with the transformer manufacturers to get them to invest more and build a larger workforce in order to get transformers out there. I've been working on innovative projects like pumped hydro in iron mines and pumped hydro in open pit mines in order to be able to avoid having to install batteries. I have been working very hard with other countries on how to take advantage of the resources they have to produce clean and renewable power. As we were talking about before the show, Tanzania has the same amount of hydropower potential as Three Gorges Dam had. I can see that turning into something at some point and making most of the southern continent of Africa energy self-sufficient in incredibly low cost power with technologies that they can sustain with their technology level. Those are the kinds of things I want to do with the rest of my career, besides train young engineers to carry on when I'm not here anymore.
Just bring it back home a little bit to our work every day. We try to tell folks and educate also as to how looking at economic, environmental, and social impacts of any large project will often actually help the project get through faster, often cheaper, and just smarter, frankly. I haven't worked on as many projects internationally. You, I, I just wonder how environmental impact analysis is done in some of the countries you mentioned, Doug.
Some countries, there's no environmental analysis. China's a good example of that in many projects. It's a government imperative, it happens. You get into Switzerland, whereas we do a part one and a part two for environmental studies. Switzerland might go to part 9 or part 10 before we get to the point where we get approval.
Hmm.
You want to be really frustrated in putting in projects. Switzerland and Germany can be two of the countries that are hardest to work in.
Interesting. Noted. Well, again, as I mentioned, we're coming up on time a little bit. I want to leave time for final thoughts. I always ask a version of the same question too. But as I mentioned earlier to you guys before we first started, one of the largest demographics that listen to this program is young people, whether it's high school, undergrad, graduate school, but just generally people around the world who are interested in these issues. Both of you have a background at various levels in educating young folks. So I wonder if you could say anything to them directly. What would it actually be on that?
I mean, I would say follow your passion and focus on if you want to solve a problem, focus on solving that problem. I mean, a lot of people go into their careers doing things because they're good at it, but not necessarily because they're passionate about it. So I think it's important to focus on what something important, some issue that's important, focus on that and try and use your skills to help solve that problem. Because you're going to be doing this for a long time and you really need to be passionate and want to do it. And the more passionate you are about solving a problem, the more likely you'll really make inroads into that and spend a lot of time and put all your efforts into it. But also have hope because these problems, there are solutions to them. Climate, air pollution, energy security, if that's your issue, there are solutions, and just keep positive and focus, keep your eye on the ball. Don't get distracted by outside, people criticizing you all the time about trying to solve these problems. That's really important because there are just so many armchair quarterbacks and critics in the world. And if we just all took everything personally and let them get under our skin, then we wouldn't be focusing and trying to actually making any progress on solving these problems. That's their goal, is to get under your skin. So it's really important to keep your eye on the ball.
Understood. Understood. Doug?
I agree with the passion part. I will say that the world of energy, many people approach it from a theory point of view. And so the old saying, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, and in practice, there is important to remember. And the place to make a difference long term is in the practice side. Being an engineer, driving a bulldozer, putting in solar, operating or maintaining a plant. And one of the nice things about those kinds of jobs, you're not going to be replaced by AI and nobody's going to offshore your job. And so if you want a long-term stable job, it may be very disappointing at times. But if you want a long-term stable job, join the energy industry and work on the practice side of things.
I like that sentiment, Doug, frankly, and it reminds me even back when I was still in high school for eons ago, the only option presented to folks was you have to go to college, you have to go to college for various reasons, and vocational schools weren't even really talked about. But for all the reasons you just said, frankly, and many others, I think they are definitely a solid option, especially for people who like that type of thing and or go with their hands and want to understand how things actually work.
And it's the only way we're going to keep the country running. You can't be a PhD and figure out what size nut goes on a bolt in a factory at the same time. There's room for people to be PhDs, and there's also room for people who do a 6-month technical certificate and go to work maintaining everything.
Well, I also like to that after all the topics we just hit on, and there definitely was a lot in the past hour, I always try to end on a hopeful note. And I think each of you touched on that to your own way. And I just wanted to thank you both again for what I found a very educational hour. And I know I learned a few things. I hope everyone listening here did as well. As always, this podcast and all of our episodes are available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and about 10 other ones I'm forgetting right now. But basically, if you look out there, you will find it. And I've been inspired, frankly, over the last year and a half over what getting people together to have conversations like this has spawned. It's not always straightforward. Not always Pollyanna. Sometimes we butt heads, but having the conversations are important. And if you're going to try to take on topics like this and try to affect positive change on issues that all of us care about and try to leave this world in a better place than you found it, you have to have these types of conversations. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and thank you both again. I definitely enjoyed this one.